Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork and embodiment coach, muse, and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. All right.
It's time for another episode.
So what are we talking about today? This is a Tightropes conversation. So Tightropes is another series that we'll be hosting here. And I have found myself in various tightrope situations where it's like walking the line between, for example, walking the line of self-care and doing things anyway because I know that, I'm wanting to accomplish them, right? So there's like this taking care of yourself versus overworking that I get to walk through. And so that's one of the tightrope examples. And then we have, I have a few more. And it's curious too to me to like, if you're listening and you have noticed a tightrope situation that you find yourself like having difficulty walking the line between these two polar opposites, I'd love to like start a discussion. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and just give me some juice on your life. And like,
she wants the tea.
I love the tea. And like, what tightropes are you walking? And what are you learning throughout the process? And how are you finding? Another way to look at this too is pendulum swinging, like how we go from one extreme to the other while trying to find a balance between both of them. So,
if you think about walking a tightrope, there's a certain level of tension that happens. And that tension is where life is lived. Because if you fall off one side or the other, there's that rush of, I'm falling through the air, but then, the net catches you and the act is over. So the fact of the matter is you get back up and you get on those tightropes over and over and over and over again. And it can be really difficult to walk, but that's where life is lived to the edge. Right. Where there's a lot of fear or even like questioning there, but you choose to keep going anyway.
Right.
So this one.
So today's episode is on walking the line between like acceptance and desensitizing yourself.
So that might, to describe a little bit of what that's like, is acceptance is the idea that, okay, I understand what's going on in my world and I know that I am in control of myself and that's it. And desensitization is more like, I'm aware that the world is going to keep on spinning no matter what, and I just am along for the ride.
Yeah, and even in your tone of voice, there's a sense of empowerment with one versus a victimization in the other. And, that's interesting because I think about Michael Singer's work anytime I think about acceptance. The Surrender Experiment is his story on that. And then he has Untethered Soul, which is a little bit more of an explanation of his work and like his life's work, which I really, really loved his teachings. And I found it really impactful for me. And then also it introduced this like dichotomy, I guess, of acceptance and like surrendering to life and like woe is me and like life is just happening to me instead of like I don't have any control, like it's just life is gonna life and what can I do about it.
It's more of a giving up than it is a empowered approach, like you said before.
Right.
So I think that Go ahead.
Well, there's that too. So it's like the surrender experiment, right? There's some things that you don't have any control over, and I think a lot about that. I think, is it called a serenity prayer?
Oh yeah. That's from 12-step programs, which I'm super glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, God, grant me the
Yep,
Go ahead.
Good job. Go ahead. I don't know if I know it by heart either, but it's
God
the idea.
grant me the. I think it's like, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Got it. Money on the bank. Good
Hey,
job.
you looked it up.
No, you didn't. You got it.
You looked it up.
Yeah, but
and
you
confirmed.
Got it.
I got it.
As the resident pastor, I need to make sure that your prayers are right. And I'm kidding. You just
Oh my gosh. Google. Thanks, Google.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The purpose of me even stating that and like really needing to get to there was
that you were talking about acceptance as a whole.
Right. So whenever I read that surrender experiment and all of I like got obsessed with Michael Singer, and I was just diving into his world of teaching, and a lot of it resonated with me. But then at the end, I'm find myself again on this tightrope of like, okay, the balance of surrender and like free will almost. So it's like there's a surrender thing happening, and then there's also like me interacting and coexisting and co-creating with the universe, right? And so, I mean, this could totally kind of go off on another
Yeah, you want to talk about
topic.
free will with a pastor. That's
Right.
going to be a real good situation.
No. But it's really interesting that idea of co-creating with the universe, and when we talk about like manifestations and creating things out of something more than just willpower and like grinding and putting in the work and the hours and the physical world is what I think about. Like there's a physical world and then there's the energetic world, and that's what I think about with like co-creating with the universe, is the physical and the energetic world meeting.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a certain level of surrender, I think, because otherwise you've got your hands gripped, like trying to control everything in the physical world, because there's the things that you physically can control or not. But then there's the energetic world of like things you can't control, and shit just happens and life happens. But it's what you choose to do and how you choose to react, not only like externally, but like internally. Like what is the energetics and the emotions, and because emotions are energy in motion. So emotions are the energetic world as well. And so we put those things into our body, and that's the energetics, and that's a part of co-creation. And so the acceptance and desensitization for me has been a tightrope thing, because it's like pulled back in through trauma, I feel like, of like as a kid being desensitized to abandonment. And so it's like, am I accepting that family's not going to show up when they say?
Right.
Or have I desensitized myself to where it doesn't even phase me anymore?
Right. Yeah.
And I've shut down. So that's where I see the difference between desensitization and acceptance. Like, desensitization is a shutdown of your emotions and of the energetics within you, and acceptance is a letting it flow, letting the emotions still flow, and it not being a shutdown of energetics.
Okay, so your significant shift is in the presence of that energy in motion. So acceptance still involves energy happening.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So yeah, there's another principle that goes along with acceptance called non-resistance. I don't know if you heard of this or not, but the idea is that, go ahead.
Well, it's funny, I like take a breath and you're like, go ahead.
It's your podcast. I'm just along for the ride.
But like non-resistance, like it's like Buddha and
yeah, pretty much.
Gandhi, right? Path of love.
Yeah.
Path of non-resistance.
Yeah. That everything that happens is happening, and there's no way that you can be like, oh, well, it's just not happening, because that's just called denial, and
Yeah.
more than a river in Egypt and all that. But
Oh my God.
It literally everybody says it as soon as someone says
yeah.
denial. But
Except for me.
Well, you aren't literally everybody. Okay. So acceptance and non-resistance is this idea of... non-resistance, the idea that when something happens, the resistances in us come up to it right away, right? So, like, oh, we don't want this to happen. I really don't want my bank account to be down where it is. I really don't want my kid to be screaming in the store. I really don't want my car insurance to be increasing. I really don't want to be laid off of my job. But all these things are happening, and you get to choose that acceptance or that desensitization in the sense of you can just be like, well, fine, there's another thing on my plate that I didn't want to happen, and just whatever, life just keeps on screwing me over, which is a lot more on that desensitization. But there's so much resistance there.
Right.
So like desensitization isn't only numbing, it's also like feeling that incredible resistance and being like, just another thing.
Well, I would say that the tightrope of desensitization versus acceptance would be how you react to resistance.
Sure.
Because everybody experiences resistance in their life, everybody. Sure. And so you can either accept it and surrender to it, or like after a certain point, sure, you get desensitized.
Sure. And so, that stuff comes up then, and people feel the resistance, and the idea of desensitization is that, well, that just happened to me again. Like, all right, fine. So that's what you're saying desensitization is that the resistance is there, but it's not allowed to flow through, and it gets stuck in you. Okay, and I can think that, I wonder if there is that sense of when you feel desensitized to something that you still feel a little bit, like, with acceptance, you're going to feel the emotion. With desensitization, you feel the emotion and then you immediately suppress it.
Yeah.
Right? So your resistance is, so your resistance is there, and there is a part of you that goes,
right.
But then that turns immediately into, yep.
That's just
what I got.
Typical.
Yep. It's going to happen to me again and again. Okay, so...
Well, then it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because then you're like, well, that's what you start to expect from your life. And so, of course, that's what you get, because that's the energetics that you're putting and co-creating with the universe.
Well, Sam, why don't you tell me a story about how that shows up in your life?
How what shows up in
your
life?
How that tightrope between acceptance and desensitization has showed up in your life in the past. Because I heard you talking about your experience with family. And I wonder if there's something that you want to dive into there.
Oh, God bless America.
Grow as we go.
I was not expecting this. Thank you.
She picks the topic, and then she goes, I don't expect this to come up from the general question asker.
Oh, God. Okay. So, acceptance versus desensitization. Well, the most immediate experience that comes up for me is my birth father being an alcoholic, and there being a lot of like abandonment and saying he would show up and not show up, and he lived like a few minutes away, so I would see him around the neighborhood like driving in his car, and it just was a really interesting experience growing up. And so I got used to him, not being a part of my life, essentially. But as a kid, of course, still wanting that. But it became a thing where I just didn't expect it, I guess. And I had, numbed myself to where if he didn't show up, it wasn't, a super inconvenience because I more or less expected that. Even though I know there was a lot of pain and hurt. And I've done a lot of work to bring that and process that because it was unprocessed at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was me desensitizing as a child to those experiences because it was really painful. Mm. And it was frequent.
Yeah.
And then I think about acceptance where I've gotten the tools to learn how to move through that and process stuff with inner child work and IFS and different things. And I know that I got to a point in my life where it was okay, this is the way that he is, and it's not my fault. It's not, and I don't really remember feeling that way as a kid, but maybe I did. But it's not like anything that I can do about it, right? So it's like the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And so I got to a place where I felt thankful for him and for who he was and the ways that he did and mostly didn't show up in my life, because that is who, made me who I am. And like genuinely thankful, and that took a really long time. And it was like accepting that I get to then, if this is the way that he is and the way that he presents and interacts in the world, and I get to decide how I want to interact with him, if at all. And so that's where like the acceptance came, and then I have a choice of how I want to interact with that.
Wow. Yes. Quite a story. That's hard. That's hard stuff, right? Like, I don't know how many of us have a similar, I'm sure that people have similar experiences in some way, right? Like, the people that were authority figures in our life just didn't do things the way that were really helpful or effective for us. I mean, some people have amazing, wonderful parents, or so maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a mentor, maybe it was a grandparent, maybe it was some sort of figure, but someone didn't always show up. And so when we were young, the opportunity for us to say, in order for me to feel safe, I have to just get used to the fact that they're not going to show up like I want them to show up, turns into all kinds of interesting, traumatic, or pseudo-traumatic, if that's even a thing.
Well, I think
and experiences.
Yeah, well, I think that doing that over and over as a child is what has you unconsciously showing up in the world and repeating those patterns so that you can heal them. Because, I mean, I don't know if I say this every time, but I feel like I've said it a lot in various like modalities, but it's like there is the healing capabilities of the body, where you think about your immune system and the way that your skin heals cuts and bruises without you even having to think about it. And I believe that there is a mental component to that, where we are our brain, our body, like we're designed to heal all the time, and our thinking mind is what inhibits our brain from healing. And it's when we can quiet it, and that's why I love breath work, when we can quiet it, it allows the subconscious mind and the body to take over that healing aspect within the brain, because the body is the subconscious mind, and the subconscious is what we're trying to live out in these ways that we, with the energetic world, co-create unconsciously in work scenarios, in relationships that you choose, and all of the stuff that you've accumulated over your, childhood and growing up is put in your subconscious mind. And then we get into relationships where we get into these scenarios where we're reliving scenarios with the same basic undertone. It's not the same exact situation, but it's the same undertone and the same feeling that's like trying to get processed. And
that's why I like story weaving so much.
Yeah.
Is because that undertone or that theme that works through all your stories are similar.
Yeah.
Like your patterns keep showing up, and that's
I'm super excited for the story time sessions. I'm pretty sure that gets to be the next episode after this one. So
sweet. I'm so excited.
Yeah, we'll get those out, and I'm really excited to do that, like for people and with people, and see how that all unfolds. It's like a fun, story, a movie. Like, awesome.
Fun and entertaining too. Okay, so in moving from a sense of what it was in the past, if it was desensitization, moving to acceptance. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm realizing now is that acceptance is the tightrope. And so there's like desensitization on one side, and then there's the opposite of that. So like numbing, and then the opposite of that would be like totally explosive and exploding and a lack of control with your emotions. And it's really interesting that I didn't even notice that being the thing, because I have not experienced that. That's not been my experience at all. I just fucking stuff it.
Everything gets buried down deep inside you.
Bury it really deep down, like on Ricky Bobby. Remember that?
Yeah. That's right. Just bury it deep down in there. And that's funny that
never
you
bring
say
it
that.
up again.
Because that's all I experienced from other people, especially my dad.
Yeah.
Like, it was always this out of control emotion that's never under any
like
kind
totally irrational.
Yeah, and just any emotion that you feel, it comes screaming out of his body at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Okay. So the conversation is more about emotions and the tightrope walking in that, where there's numbing and stuffing versus explosive.
Right.
Okay. So I want to bring back to what I was sharing earlier about like co-creating with the universe, and you were talking about resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the tightrope is between numbing your emotion, like you have this resistance or you have this hardship, this challenge in life, and the choice is you can numb and just stuff your emotions, or you can go on the other end and like just explode with these emotions and like just lose your shit.
Everything's not fair and life is awful.
Yeah, and like trying to process that, where the tightrope that you want to walk is the acceptance of this resistance that's showing up, the acceptance of the hardship. And another interesting thing is the idea of co-creating with the universe. And so with the energetic world and the physical world coming together, there's, you know, energetically how you deal with it is like exploding everywhere or numbing. And again, with you putting yourself in various scenarios subconsciously to help heal these things, you put yourself in scenarios where you get to explode, or you get the opportunity to numb again, or you get the opportunity to make another choice. And so, yeah, that's all really curious. And now I'm curious to ask you the same question around your experience with explosiveness.
Okay, so that same question being like, what's my experience with having a dad, really, who everything that he emoted was on just an absolute, an 11 out of 10. So the energy that he carried into our relationship was always ridiculously high. And so I responded to that by either having really high emotions myself. I would cry, or I would wail, or I would scream, or just have immense amounts of fear. Or I would just go into my room and close the door and read books or play video games and stuff everything down.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had the opportunity, like everyone has different opportunities, right? So I had the opportunity to like act out and be fucking crazy about my dad's stuff, but I ended up just stuffing it all down. Yeah. But it sounds like your experience was like you toggled between both.
Yeah, like, and it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't like I was like screaming back. I wasn't screaming back at him. I wasn't like, you know, trying to show how big of a one-up I was. It was just like, when you're around that much energy of emotion, I couldn't help but like be overwhelmed and moved to tears, because I'm just like, what is going on? And like, what did I do to make this happen? And so I didn't know that like acceptance of his emotion was an option, because what was communicated from him was, you're responsible for this emotion that I have.
Yeah, well, and I think that this is something that we've talked about before, where it's hard to have acceptance with things, especially as a child, or where there's not really the option of leaving, because acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that you need to stay.
Right.
And like tolerate and just continue to put yourself in these abusive situations. But as a child, you have no choice.
Right. You don't really, because this is the life that you're born into. And the lessons that you're learning in the shadow of your parents are not chosen. And if you're in a home where nobody teaches you about acceptance, then your only options are respond with high levels of emotion or pretend like they don't exist, because that's what our body does in order to survive. It's a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Because the truth is, whenever those situations happen to us, fear and trauma happens. Like trauma happens because we don't know how to shake it off. Trauma happens because we don't know what in the world's going on. So it's not like we have the choice to say, yes, my father is acting from a place of unhealed wounds, and I have the ability to accept that.
Yeah, that'd be kind of creepy, actually.
That'd be amazing. That'd be something else. That would be amazing if that was our natural response. But the truth is, our natural response is fear. And so in that fear, how do we respond right away? And our body responds that way to keep us safe and to keep us from further danger. Because we would love to act differently. I mean, even as adults, we would love to act differently.
Right.
But,
well, isn't this like part of that other tightrope conversation that we had in the car?
Yeah.
Where it was like, I think we were talking a lot about trauma. Well, no, it's the trauma, the all or nothing thinking episode. Episode 4.
Nice.
Trauma and all or nothing. So, yeah, that's a bit of this conversation. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to that one, because we talk a lot about the trauma, like trauma response and all or nothing thinking, basically, which leads to what we're talking about.
Right. So that idea that like there is no emotion whatsoever, or there's all emotion all the time, and neither of those are helpful. And so the tightrope of acceptance that we walk right in the middle, knowing that falling off on either side isn't healthy or helpful, this is the area of growth for us.
Right.
Is being able to say, instead of, no, I don't accept this, so I act out entirely, or fine, I'll quote unquote accept this, when really I just pretend like it doesn't exist in so many ways, or stuff it down. Walking that line of acceptance is a totally different way and totally different approach. Right. So what is the most important thing in that new approach of acceptance when it comes to, as you said, like letting the emotions flow through you and stuff like that? That's a lot easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like, what are the practices that we get to do to allow acceptance to be our primary response to the resistances that come up in life?
Well, I think that's where, all different healing modalities come in, like breath work or therapy or movement, and having awareness. Like, awareness is such a key thing. And, I find myself, it's really interesting, I get awareness, and then I have this part of me that likes to help me forget that I don't get to change. Or something. I don't know. It was a really curious thing. But, and it's like, I feel like it's picking at me right now. It's like, what was I just saying?
Yeah, this episode has been a wonderful bundle of chaos, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. But I think it's just awareness. And however you get that, I think that's the key to self-growth, period, is finding different, whatever tools work for you to be able to gain more awareness and then make different choices out of the awareness that you have. And yeah, I think we get to wrap this up. I just would like to share a bit of behind the scenes. This episode was paused, and like, what was I saying? What was going on here? And just a lot. Like, there were several times I lost my train of thought, and I was like, I don't, like, even right now, I want to go back and listen to the whole episode and make sure that it's like cohesive before I publish it. But it's really fascinating because I'm noticing this part of me that I spoke about that comes up and just like wipes my memory, and I forget what I was saying, forget my train of thought, and like forget what was happening before. And so that's something that I'm like currently working on and currently working through. And to be specific and vulnerable about things, it's interesting because we're talking about acceptance. And right now I'm going through the lesson of accepting love, because I have numbed myself to that and not allowed like certain levels of love in. And so, for a long time, like I thought I had an understanding of what love is, and that essentially looked like neglect.
Oof. Oh, ouch. That's not fun.
So it's been fun learning like different levels of love and accepting that.
Yeah.
So
what is one way that you're becoming more aware of that?
Becoming more aware of my ability to accept love.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not really wanting to get into a deep dive of parts conversation.
Yeah.
And I can say that the awareness has come around a part that I have who is incredibly sassy and, intolerant in ways as well, and has unreasonably high expectations on myself and everybody else. And, So just having awareness around the parts has been, for me. And so sometimes that looks like I have awareness, and so I get to make a different choice.
Yeah.
And sometimes that part has taken over, and circumstances have happened due to that situation. Yeah. And then later I get to reflect and make a different choice based off of that. And so, that's what I mean when I say I'm going through it and uncovering that. And so I can share in a later episode once I've figured that all out, or, a little bit more deeply, but yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that one of the pieces of awareness for you is the ability to look at your life circumstances and to be able to say, oh, I see that showing up here. And I see that showing up in my relationships, and I see that showing up in my word. So if any of you as listeners are curious about, well, how do I become aware? Look at where it's showing up everywhere.
Yeah. There's patterns on patterns on patterns, because how you do one thing is how you do anything. And it goes into that like subconscious healing thing that I talked about at least once or twice on this podcast. So I'm ready to wrap this up because...
Boom. Put a bow on it.
Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media, or leave a review. And we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.